Hey all, this is Sasha Gallant from USAID, the Development Innovation Ventures or DIV team. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have this panel of experts here with us and looking at our list of attendees and RSVPs. It looks like we have quite a mix of grantees here today. Thanks again for joining us. We have, I think, nearly 90 RSVPs for today's presentation, which means I think we've struck a nerve with this topic. It's cutting across sectors, geographies, providers. This is something that I think is super relevant to all of our organizations. Quickly, I want to say, as Tom did last time, that this is something new for us. It's now the second event that we've done of this type. We're looking at this as a pilot, and we want to see if this is something that is of interest to you. I hope it is. I hope it's useful. And as per usual, we will follow up afterwards regarding how this went. We'd love to hear other ideas of other things that you want to hear about and you want to learn about. So feel free to add them to the RSVP and the original invite, as well as kind of reaching out to us and making sure that we have these different topics covered moving forward. It looks like we have almost 60 of our attendees here at this time, so I will get started very quickly, just kind of introduce the panel and moderator, and then hand it off. So we're super glad to have Michael Roberts here of IDE, who has been with the company for nearly 17 years, building value chains and business models. Michael's now serving as country director in Cambodia, where he leads work in improving rural incomes and livelihoods. There's a lot to add here. Scott Roy has joined us today, managing director of the Whitten Roy partnership. Scott has it looks like worked his way through the full sales spectrum, from on-the-ground sales to management of large chains and organizations. Thanks, Scott, for joining us. We have Boston Nyer, co-founder and general manager of Burn, a fantastic company that designs, locally manufactures, distributes, and figures out how to sell clean burning cook stoves in East Africa. And we're very lucky to have Saida Benhayoune of MIT's D-Lab serve as our moderator. Saida is the Scale Ups Program Director, where along with many other roles, she supports an acceleration platform to bring technologies to market for large-scale social impact in developing contexts. Thank you guys again. Thanks so much for joining us, to our panelists, to our moderator, and to everybody who was able to join us here today. There will be a recording afterwards, so feel free to continue to return to the pearls of wisdom that are dropping you over the course of the next hour. And Saida, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me moderate this panel. I sort of come up to this subject through two hats that I wear here at MIT. The first one is I'm the director of the Scale Ups Fellowship Program that helps social entrepreneurs from MIT move their ideas from prototype to market-ready stage. And then the second hat is I'm also the director of the MIT Practical Impact Alliance, which is a community of learning and practice that brings together intrapreneurs, so practitioners that are working either within large corporations, large NGOs, social ventures, or government, and we help them engage in peer learning and collaborative action around inclusive business. And so when I started reflecting on this theme of BoP sales, I realized that within those two communities, and also with our students here, our MBA students at Sloan, we talk a lot about distribution, so how to bring the products to the last mile. We talk about marketing, how to generate demand around the product. We talk about financing and manufacturing and design. And actually very little is said about the sales function. Surprisingly, because a social venture, just like a commercial venture, if there is no sales performance, the whole thing falls apart. And specifically in BoP markets, I would say that it's even more important for the sales function to be effective. Precisely because the risk that's associated with the sales, both for the customer and the social venture, is high. For the customer, they have little money, and so they need to make sure that the sales is actually effective. And for the social enterprise, who is dealing with a lot of complexity, and have little room for error, there's a lot at stake too in the sales function. So, so yeah, it's a little surprising that very little is being talked about in academia about the around the sales function. It's a little bit taboo. It's like people are a bit uncomfortable talking about selling things to people living in poverty. So, so today we're going to focus on that. We're not going to be talking about distribution or marketing. We're going to try to focus on the sales function. And to borrow some of Scott's words, we're going to talk about the last yard, not the last mile. What happens in that last yard of transaction between the buyer and the seller when we're talking about selling products that have social good value to them. So our panelists have been working to build effective sales teams for many years. They bring different perspectives to the subject, and I hope that we can get some of their wisdom up to you in the next hour. So with that, I'd like to maybe start with you, Scott. I was wondering, through your experience trying to help social venture train their teams to be effective, sales team, what have been the main errors that you've seen, the main commonly made mistakes in BoP sales? And on the other side, what would be some of the key concepts that social enterprises in this space have to keep in mind when they are building BoP sales?
Sure. Thanks, Saida. Well, it was your lead-in with respect to the sort of ignorance of sales, I think, in a way, or ignoring sales. Let's put it that way. Is spot on. We as a consultancy, we've been for the last 8 years working in the developing world. First, starting with a project that Mike Roberts invited me to come in on. Which was the Farm Business Advisor program. I didn't know anything about farming, but I knew a lot about sales. My whole career has been in sales and sales management. Just probably would be helpful just to hear one little piece about that, is that for 23 years, I spent my entire career, selling on a direct sales basis here in the United States, and then going into management, and then building teams, and then building organizations, and then building a couple of companies. And it's interesting, after having personally recruited about 1,500 salespeople and training them and training the managers and doing all that, and then going to Cambodia and working with Mike, the similarities between the two were shocking to me. I mean, in other words, what we do in direct sales in the United States is almost exactly what we found could work in Cambodia, that direct sales door-to-door approach, and particularly because of the behavioral change aspect of a one-on-one encounter or small group encounters. And so, Whitten Roy Partnership now, we're a consultancy that works primarily in the developing world now with social ventures and, organizations that are genuinely concerned with the well-being of people. And that means their own employees as well as the people that they sell to. And so, when we look at the mistakes, the common mistakes that are made, I think one of the most important ones is the fact that people really don't understand selling very well. They think it's sort of, you build a good product or a great product. In fact, there's so many innovations that are happening in the developing world now with amazing products in solar and agriculture and, in cook stoves and clean cooking and all of these things that are happening. Great engineering goes into these, but very little thought, very little engineering thought goes into sales, in that, as you refer to, that last yard or the last meter that happens between two human beings. And that's the part where the magic happens, is, how does somebody communicate with a client? How do they find those clients? How do they actually make sure they see everyone in a village, not just skate through and just see the low-hanging fruit, and then on to the next village? So, how do you make sure that people are selling in a way that's ethical? I mean, people immediately think that just because, you're selling something is that it's a license to lie, cheat, and steal. It's because of what people believe about selling. And this is around the entire globe. I mean, it's the same thing in Laos, or the same thing in Cambodia, or in Zambia, or in San Francisco. I mean, people just have some misconceptions about what great selling is. And so, so the one, I think, most important thing that people fail to do in the developing world is to really own fully the sales function, understand it, own it, build it properly, be sure that there's proper training, et cetera, that goes into helping the human beings communicate well within their teams to the people who are going to be buying. And so that's sort of big number one. And I think big number two mistake I see is that when people begin selling to the public, is they think selling is pitching. They think selling is about talking. If you ask a crowd of people, which I normally do, when you associate, what do you associate salespeople with, talking or listening? And people all smile and they sort of start laughing. And I was at Stanford a few weeks back, and I asked that question, and sure enough, people were snickering and laughing about selling. Of course, well, salespeople are talkers. They're great talkers, and well, certainly talking is a part of selling. But actually, what we believe is that great selling has to do with great listening. And when you listen to people and understand the problems they have, then you're on the right track toward creating a solution, or taking your solution and fitting it in a customized way to each family situation. So what we believe is that you don't lead with a pitch, but you lead with a problem. And that means that you listen for the problems that customers have, and then you develop sales techniques that emphasize listening to the problem first, and then really engaging with a customer long enough so that they can understand what that problem is, and actually waking up to stuff that they've been putting up with for years. A good example of that would be the sanitation business, if you want to call it the business. But you have people who for years have been just going out in the woods or in the fields, and that's where they defecate. And there's not even a second thought given about it, because that's the way their parents taught them and what their parents do, and grandparents, et cetera. And so if you're going to penetrate that, if you're really going to penetrate that, you've got to get people to think deeply about the problem, in the problem with open defecation. And there are lots of different problems, health problems and social problems, et cetera, et cetera. But you need to have skills to convey to your sales teams, and to whether it's a one-on-one or a group situation, you need to teach people how to have a great problem-led conversation, which is really about listening. It's about asking thoughtful questions. It's about playing back what people say to you. And when that happens, people begin thinking more deeply. They begin thinking more analytically and critically about their own situation. Even in the simplest of conditions, people will do that. And so I think that's probably a big problem number two I see in the developing world, is that people don't think deeply enough about the problem, because if they do, then they'll be motivated to find a solution about it. By the way, that's also true in the Western world. Okay, and so you asked the third part, which is or second part, which is what what can be done. What if you're building a sales organization in the developing world? A model that I developed this about 30 years ago for my own use is called the RACE formula, RACE, and it stands for R equals A plus C plus E. You can see it on our website if people want to get more information about it. But it's a very simple framework that we use to be able to analyze what's going on in a direct sales team, and then construct thoughtful strategy, thoughtful training, thoughtful sales techniques, et cetera, that will actually get the job done. So what RACE stands for is results equal attitude, the attitude of the salesperson, the attitude of the manager, the general attitude of the team, plus competence, which is obviously the selling skill. It's also about product competence. You need to have some of that, but you need a lot more selling skill than product competence. And then the last one, the E, is execution, which is the strategy in action. It's doing the right things at the right time with the right people. And when you put all three of those together, you combine those, then you'll generate the results in sales. And correspondingly, any problems that an organization has, you can use that same framework to overlay and look through those lenses, if you want to call them, to spot attitude, competence, and execution issues. And when you see those things, then you're able to make corrections or take corrections to be able to improve performance. Okay, so that's what we call the race formula, and it's something that is very funny when we go in and do a consultation with a client, or even speak to them on the telephone for an hour or so just to learn and understand about the problems they're facing, is that oftentimes the client will will begin using that framework very quickly. It's a very easy thing for them to get their head wrapped around, and very easy for the team to get their head wrapped around. So that's a little nugget that may be helpful to you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks. These are really interesting concepts. We'll get back to maybe illustrating them a little bit more. I'd like to go to you, Mike. IDE Cambodia has several businesses, so it would be great to hear from you a little bit about them and their different sales strategies. But I also know that you eventually, at some point, have made an intentional decision to invest in the sales function, and I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what pushed you first to make that decision, what were the results, and what were the lessons learned.
Right. Yeah, so I think the perspective I bring to this panel is that in Cambodia, we've had experience applying sort of a systematic sales approach in 3 different programs. And I've asked the organizer, Bashir, to put in the chat column, I just wrote about 3 little blurbs that gives some stats about the different programs and enterprises that we're working with. One of them is an agricultural program that sells agricultural inputs like seeds and irrigation equipment, etc., to small-scale farmers, and then backs it up with technical advice and linkages to markets. And in that program, we have a sales force of about 15 paid, what we call commercial agronomists, and about 150 independent individuals that we call farm business advisors, and they're not employed by the program, but they earn money by selling inputs and providing technical support to the clients. So that's one program that we have going on here that's using a sales force approach. Another program is in the clean water space, and that's called Hydrologic, and it produces and sells ceramic water filters across Cambodia. There's 3 main channels that we sell through. One is bulk sales to NGOs and institutions. Another one is retailers. But the largest by far and the most important is a direct sales channel where we're doing village group sales and door-to-door sales through a team of about 24 sales agents that are employees. And the third area where we've been applying sort of sales force techniques has been in sanitation marketing. This is rural latrines, providing sanitary latrines to rural households. And so in this case, IDE is actually managing a rural sales force of about 250 sales agents that go out and do these village by village and door-to-door sales activities and stir up demand. And then we direct those orders to a network of local concrete manufacturers who will then build and then install the latrines at the client's household. And those sales agents get paid by the local concrete manufacturers. They get paid a commission by those local entrepreneurs. And so that's the third area where we've been applying sort of sales techniques, and we've had really good results. In the sanitation marketing, we've been able to sell between 30 to 40,000 latrines a year, and these are unsubsidized. They're full cost latrines. Through the water filter company, we sell on average last couple of years about 55,000 water filters per year, and with the agricultural program, we're serving about 4,000 small-scale farmers every year. I think what your second, so that's a bit of an overview of kind of our activities in Cambodia. The second question that you asked, Saida, was about sort of what led us to make that investment. And it goes way back, as Scott mentioned. I met Scott about probably 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And we started talking about what he did in sales and working with an insurance company and whatnot. And I saw that it really kind of matched up with what we were trying to do with this agriculture company, because we had a network of independent agents, independent salespeople that would be trying to sell a product. And I thought we could really use that type of thinking. And so we began talking and pieced together something which eventually we started calling human-centered sales, a human-centered sales approach. And to my mind, I'm an engineer by training, and to my engineering mind, it was really attractive because I think what Scott brought to this whole sales function was a very systematic approach. He broke it down into very understandable steps. It wasn't this amorphous, just sort of go out there and sell type of approach. There were very clear steps and tools and ways to diagnose problems and ways to fix problems as you diagnose them. And so that really appealed to me as an engineer. And as we started to gain some experience too, we were able to collect some data there in the agriculture program where we began introducing these concepts. We had about 2 years of data of attempts to sell agricultural inputs before we started sort of professionalizing our sales force. And then we had data for about 2 years after we began professionalizing our sales force. And we saw a marked change. The sales per agent, very quickly doubled. And then the rate at which those sales were improving over time increased also. So that kind of gave us the confidence to say, yeah, this is a real thing, and it's actually delivering results. And I think one of the keys is that with help from Scott's group and then a lot of trial and error in the field, we were able to kind of develop for each program what I kind of think of as almost like equations for success. So with water filter sales, for example, we know that the salespeople, they have to organize a certain number of village meetings per week. And at each of those village meetings, they have to have a certain number of prospective clients show up. And at each one of those meetings, we want to convert a certain percentage of those clients, of prospective clients, to be into actual orders. And so once you kind of break it down like that, you can track those numbers and you can identify if a salesperson's results are tapering off. You can say, well, which one of those 3 numbers is not sort of meeting the benchmarks, and then you can go in and provide specific tools to help the managers coach and improve the skills, or improve the attitude, or improve the execution of the salespeople that they're working with. And then so that sort of system got to be embedded in our agricultural program. And then as we started to move into these other areas, we transferred sort of similar approaches to the water filters and to the sanitation marketing as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes around it. And Boston, so can you tell us a little bit about the burn sales strategy, the scale to date, and then what have you learned as a social enterprise in building your direct sales team? And also, what are the remaining challenges? I think it would be great to hear that too.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good questions. So just a little bit of background. We started manufacturing and selling household improved cook stoves in Kenya 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago now. And we've sold about 265,000 of those products to date. Not many of them were in the first 12 or 18 months. So most of that is in the last 2.5 years. And currently we're selling about 10 or 12,000 of those a month. The breakdown is about 40% retail. So that's everything from big supermarkets, second, third tier retail, and that's just people walking into the retail points and picking up a product and walking out with it. So those are mostly pull sales, which kind of gives you an indicator of the health of the demand. Then about 20% are being sold through banks or MFIs, or kind of more formal financial institutions. And then about 30% are just distributors of all different kinds, who are either agent networks or selling to women's groups or hawking in the streets. And then about 10% is export. So we're mostly B2B, but we have developed our own B2C channel, which I'll talk about a little bit. And I'd say some of the nuggets of information is many of these social enterprises start from a product, because Mike's an engineer, I'm an engineer. Scott, I don't know if you've got an engineering background, but you certainly have that sort of mind as well. But there you go, exactly, yeah. And especially at D-Lab, a lot of people coming out are engineers and are very product based. And we tweak these products forever, right? You tweak this and you tweak that, and then like 3 years later, it's 2 years away, and then finally it gets to the market, and then we think, okay, well, we've got to figure out distribution. And some of us then succeed in trying to tweak the distribution models. Are we going to do an agent network? Are we going to sell to women's groups? Are we going to sell retail? Are we going to work with community leaders? And we tend to tweak those things, but then we never really tweak the actual point of sale and the interaction between the salesperson and the hopeful customer. And it's amazing when you go back to this race concept. Each one of these distribution models can be successful or not successful, right? And they have to be executed well in order to be successful. And sometimes we end up making these decisions like, that distribution model doesn't work. But maybe if we had actually tweaked the point of sale enough, we could have made any of these distribution models work. And then it ends up becoming which one's most scalable, which one has the best margins, or resonates most with customers. So I think that's one thing that we've worked on, and even should do better in the future. And then one good example of a scenario in which we've done that is our B2C channel, where we're selling directly to women's groups. And in Kenya, they're called chamas, and chama is a generic term for 3 different types of groups. One is a table bank, 2 is a merry-go-round financing scheme, and the third one is a group investment, but they're all called chamas. Can be anywhere from 10 to 400 women, but typically you can think of like 30 people, mostly women. And originally we came with this kind of engineering perspective of, okay, well, the product has a clear value proposition, so we're in a good position, and it's a great product. So all we have to do is go get in front of someone and then walk through the value propositions in order of most important to least important. And then we've done as much as we can, so people should buy. And I think that's the typical mindset is, and back to what Scott was saying is, if I'm the person selling, I'm doing 90% of the talking, and I'm just walking through, okay, well, the cook stove is X efficiency and it's Y dollars, and you should buy it because it's easy to use, it's got this knob or this ashtray or whatever, very product based. And one of the things that we learn is obviously something that we all know is, because we're consumers ourselves, our consumers are not always rational, and we make very emotional decisions. So we tried this pilot where we split our B2C channel into 2. One was doing very kind of product-based pitching, and one was doing an emotional-based sales pitch. And there was 3 people on each team. And the first team that existed was already going for about 9 months. And within 3 months, the second team that started, who was doing an emotional sales pitch, had caught up to the other team and surpassed them at about 500 or 600 stoves a month. And it's just amazing to see same product, same type of customer. All you have to do is relate to customers in a different way, and your results can dramatically change. So that was one of the things that we learned, and I think maybe a nugget of information that people can take away from this. The only other change we had in that scenario was the commission breakdown. It was a little bit more heavy salary, less commission with the first group, and heavier commission, lower base on the second group. Switched from about 2/3 base, 1/3 commission on the first group to we flip-flopped that on the other one roughly. So 2/3 commission, 1/3 base, something like that.
So the group who did better is the one who had the 2/3 commission.
Yeah, and the ones who are selling on an emotional-based sales pitch.
Okay. Thank you. Any main challenges you're still facing right now with your direct sales, let's say?
Oh, all kinds of problems. Yeah, I don't think no one doesn't. Yeah, no one doesn't have any problem. Yeah, I mean, the first problem would be how do we sell more? And then the second, one of the big issues we're having is because we're mainly B2B, and we started this B2C channel, we have an issue of how to balance those two channels with each other. How do we ensure that we're keeping our partners and distributors happy while opening up this new distribution channel that we think has a lot of potential for scale? So, looking at training some of our distributors who are interested in learning what we've learned and maybe taking that channel on. That's one option. Another option would be looking at maybe just a couple geographic locations where we don't have strong distributors and saying, okay, well, we're going to focus here and you guys are strong over on this other side of the country. So we'll be hands off there. But that strategy is still kind of unfolding. So I'd say those are probably the two biggest challenges within that small B2B or B2C channel.
Great, thank you. Scott, I saw you nod when Boston was talking about emotional sales, and I had the chance to actually sit on a lecture that Scott gave a couple of weeks ago, and I was really intrigued by the DQ model, so the decision-making coefficient model, and how the understanding of the problem mirrors the acceptance of the solution. I was wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit more about that and illustrate it with a few examples. I think we touched upon it with Boston's case, but if you can say a little bit more about that, that would be helpful.
Sure. Well, first of all, Boston, I just want to commend you on what a brilliant pilot you ran. To contrast the product. I've never heard of that. I mean, I've never heard of anybody doing that. That is brilliant. And that's great. I mean, we often say that selling, some people buy on logic and some people buy on emotion. So you want to be sure that you're appealing to people on both. And so it's what we call emotional logic. A lot of times I hear, and this is probably going to be very controversial and people will disagree with me, but I hear an awful lot that selling in the developing world is all about aspirational products, and I don't quite agree with that. I think that if you really look at the heart of aspiration, it's really, there's a problem that needs to be solved, and fundamentally, if you can focus on that problem, like health, some of the health concerns that happen with poor lighting or poor ventilation or smoke inhalation or, in sanitation, using the bathroom outdoors or whatever it might be, there's always a problem that's at the heart of this. And I think this is one of the things that where our marketing teams, I think, in organizations really understand this. People who are marketers understand this, but I think where marketers fall down is that, they study the problems very closely, and then they develop, value propositions that mirror those problems, you see. So in other words, it's their study of the problem that then creates the value proposition, but then the salesperson then goes out and just pitches the value proposition. And that's what you're talking about, Boston, is they're just pitching all about the product and its features and benefits. And what we strongly believe is that marketing could really do a much better job in bringing people along and saying, yes, this is the value proposition. You'll get there eventually. But the way you get there is by doing what you did originally when you did the marketing study, and that study the problem. So fundamentally, we believe that salespeople need to become great at talking about the problem with their customers. And of course, there's a whole science behind that as far as how do you talk to people about the problem? Do you lecture to them about the problem? I mean, we see some organizations that do understand this, but the way that they deliver it to the potential clients is through a, let me tell you about the problems you have. You know, it's like you got smoke inhalation, you know, and you've got problems with this, and you have a chance of getting diarrhea, and or whatever the problems are. And that's not the way to deliver that. The way to deliver it is by engaging with people in a conversation where it just opens up conversation. So in Boston's case, where it's a cook stove, it's like, tell me how you guys cook around here. How do you prepare your meals? And that's an opening conversation. That's an opening question. You say. Or Mike, with hydrologic, it's like, tell me, how do you treat your water around here? Or do you treat your water? Really? Okay, how do you do that? And so it's an inquiry. It's an inquiry into whatever the issue is or problem is. And I'm glad you mentioned Boston B2B, because that's what we do in the commercial world. I mean, we in the London and in Hong Kong and Singapore, New York, et cetera. We work with teams in the B2B space, and in fact, we're finding more and more people we're working with in the commercial space and B2B space in developing countries such as yours. And it's very interesting how that's beginning to gain a lot of steam in the developing world. But fundamentally, whether it's B2B or B2C, it's about looking at the problem that needs to be solved. And when you understand what the problem is, and then you guide a customer through a deep conversation about the problem, far more than what a person believes the conversation, how deep it should go. And you also do a calculation of how much that problem actually is costing a family. I'm talking about dollars and cents, or pounds and pence, or in real, or whatever currency you're working in, is doing an actual calculation. You can actually monetize what the annual, and if your product has a 5-year life, calculating over 5 years what people are spending, and so, for example, Mike, at Hydrologic, if you're spending about $100 a year on firewood or charcoal, et cetera, over a 5-year period, a family is going to spend about $500. You see, so so once that's in place, the problem and understanding what happens when you don't treat your water, and all of the downsides of that, plus the logic, so that's the emotion, plus the logic of the cost of the problem, you put those together, and what that does, that creates an awareness that's much bigger than what a family ever had before you walked up and knocked on their door, or before they sat in that group meeting. And once that happens, there's one simple question: is the problem serious enough, and is it costing you enough that you want to do something about it? And that's what the first part of any great sales presentation needs to do, is to guide a customer on that journey and deepening their understanding of the problem. And then the second part, then once that the answer to that question is, well, yes, I want to solve that problem. Great, let me show you what we can do to solve that problem. And then obviously then you bring the product and this product features and benefits, and you match those features and benefits directly to the problems that were discussed. You say. And one last thing I wanted to say about this is that when this is done, your salespeople, after they've done about 100 of these presentations, you need to coach them on saying, look, this is the first time that the customer you're going to be talking to, every customer, has ever heard about this. So there are no shortcuts. So you need to lead that customer through an exploration of that problem, just like it was the first time you heard this. You've got to do that every time, because it's the first time they've ever heard this, you see. And that's one of the secrets, is there's no shortcuts in that front end of the sales conversation. We often say that that's where you want to spend the time, is on the problem definition and the cost of that problem, and all the, the situation they have, the problems they have with it, the implications and impact, and all that defines the need. That's right from Neil Rackham's book on what we call spin selling. But it's like, this is you want to go down that what we call the y-axis. We want to go down the y-axis to be able to plumb the depths of the problem, and then on the x-axis, you're able to then fit a solution to that problem, and then achieve what we call DQ, which is high DQ or decision intelligence. DQ is like IQ or EQ. Is the deeper you go with a problem, then the better the customer is going to understand the importance of that solution. You go shallow with a problem, there's going to be a shallow understanding of the solution. And the only way that they're going to make a decision is if the price is enough, or is not so much that they, can reach in the pocket and pay for it. But if you go deep with a problem and people really get the problem, there's going to be a sense of concern and urgency to do something about it now. And that's what we want to do in sales. You don't have to discount. You don't have to give things away. You don't have to subsidize. You just go ahead and do a great job in really plumbing the depths of the problem, the cost of the problem. People will find the money. They will do it, okay? Within reason. They'll find the money or a way to pay for it if they're motivated, and that's how you get them to be motivated.
Thank you, Scott. I'm a little bit cognizant of the time, and I want to get to some of the questions that we received from the audience before. I wanted to eventually talk a little bit about the race model, but we'll come back to that at the end. I think there's a lot of literature about it on your website, and people can also go back to that. So looking at the questions that we received, many of them were talking about recruitment. What skills to recruit for when you're selling to the POP? Are there any best practices in terms of recruitment? I want to direct this question to you, Mike, having done this in several type of businesses. What are the key lessons learned in terms of recruitment, and what do you look for? Mike, we can't hear you. You might be on mute.
Yes, I was. Thank you. A couple of pointers, I guess, from our experience. One is, I mean, we are we're an NGO, but we work in sort of business and market development space. And some of our staff come from NGO backgrounds, and they don't make very good salespeople. So you need to hire from the private sector, or hire straight from university, or straight, just young people that are fresh and able to take on new lessons and learn. Because you really need that kind of a mindset, I think, to be successful. I think some of the qualities that we would look for is in ability to communicate, talk in public, strong organizational abilities, really positive attitude. Mobility is in most of our rural sales models, it requires moving from village to village. One of the things that we found in all three of our sales forces that we're using in the Cambodian context is that women actually are much better performers than men in this role. Especially with water and sanitation, they're better able to relate to women clients or the women in the households who are often quite involved in the purchase decision. And I think women in general, I think the stereotype often holds true that women are put more emphasis on being relational, and so that really helps them in the sales process. But also culturally, women face more obstacles in getting into that role. There's certain taboos about women who maybe traveling around too much and whatnot. Responsibilities at home sometimes make it difficult for women to take on these roles. But those who are able to overcome those obstacles tend to be much better performers. At least in the Cambodian context, we found that works. And maybe a last thing to say about recruitment is that by far, that's the biggest challenge that we face in all of our programs, and that's often what is limiting our growth. It's just the ability to find good people, train them up, and not only the salespeople, but the managers of the salespeople as well. And that recruitment and training and nurturing and growing process is long and hard, and there's a lot of attrition with people along the way. And so it's a big challenge, and I think you need to make sure that you put appropriate resources towards it, and give yourself realistic time horizons for introducing these sales systems and thinking about how fast you can grow.
Thanks, Mike. So just wondering from Scott or Boston if there are any other tips on recruitment, and then maybe moving on to the question also of management, like recruiting frontline salespeople, but recruiting also sales managers. And what does that take? Scott or Boston?
Sure, I'll pop in here. You know, essentially what we find is that, you know, you recruit for not for experience necessarily. We find that that oftentimes the products that are being sold require more than just a quick interaction with customers, and so therefore a fast-moving consumer goods background type of person, which is very common to find in developing countries, is going to come typically with problems, and that is you're going to have to retrain them completely. And quite frankly, you're not probably going to have an easy time of that. And I'm being very unfair, I'm sure. I'm very, very general with that, but that's been my experience, is that fast-moving consumer goods is about a quick pitch and a quick turnaround. And so what I would recommend is that you find people, as Mike was saying, people who are good communicators, people who are young, who want to learn, who are eager to learn. You know, my background came from recruiting people here in the United States into the publishing business and the insurance business. I never looked for people with experience. I didn't want people with experience in sales or in management. I wanted to train them my way. You know, I wanted to make sure that they knew exactly what is the methodology that we wanted them to take on. And that, you know, when you have a clean slate, you can do that. But it also requires you then to develop people, have a training capability, et cetera. And so if you don't have that, then, you know, you're going to suffer with, you know, people's bad habits from previous sales jobs. And that's true in management as well. And just to reiterate what, I can't remember, I guess what was Mike was saying, is it's a slow climb. This is not something you do overnight. It does more like, it happens more like what Boston described, which is, you know, it's slowly, and then all of a sudden, you know, you'll take off in the proverbial hockey stick. But that's because over time, you're really developing good practices and good habits and good culture within your organization. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay, so we only have 5 minutes, and I want to fit in a few questions. Boston, could you tell us a little bit about incentives and compensation? You have several, you tested several compensation schemes. In your experience, what works better? And then also outside of the monetary compensation, are there any incentives that you have found to work better than others?
I think probably Scott and Mike have more to offer on this than I do, but I'll share my experience. I mean, I don't think there's any one equation that people can put into the computer and say, okay, well, if I have this many people and the product's that amount, you should have this base and that commission. So it's always something that you have to try and understand what you're trying to accomplish and then structure your compensation around that. So for example, if you want a sales force of 1,000 people on the ground, you probably don't want to pay everyone $500 a month base and then 10% commission. And if you don't want to have 50% turnover every month, you don't want to have 100% commission and no base. So you really have to determine what you're trying to accomplish and then find a solution that works best for you. And the reason why I say a solution is because there's not one solution that's like the exact right answer for anyone's scenario. If you're looking back at you know, targets and things like that, you just have to be really clear about, okay, well, if I was sitting in this person's shoes, okay, so I would make this as a base, and maybe that's enough to sustain my family or whatever, and then make sure that there's not any disincentives at any point. So if I sell a certain amount, then I can't make any more commissions, or maybe there's a reach target with a bottle of whiskey if you get to that point or something. So you just need to make sure that if you put yourself in each different role's shoes and run a few different scenarios and make sure that it incentivizes everyone and depending, you know, if you're doing well, if you're not doing well. So that's about all.
Okay. The next question is about sales with financing. This is for you, Mike, because I know at least your hydrologic business, I don't know about the sanitation, you do have financing as part of the offering. I was wondering if that makes a difference in terms of the sales strategy or the sales training when you have to actually sell with financing versus not.
Yeah, in one of our programs, we make a lot of use of finance, and the other two programs, it's mostly cash sales. And there's pros and cons to both. But with Hydrologic, the water filter company, we've been using primarily finance-based sales. Initially, it was partnering with MFIs, microfinance institutions, and sort of we would give the sales presentation at a village meeting, and then afterwards, an MFI representative would stand up and say, and if you want to buy this on credit, we'll write you up a loan. And that worked quite well. But they were rather small loans. They were like $40 or so. And that wasn't really enough to be really attractive to MFIs. And so we found over time that although it was a fruitful relationship, there were limitations of how far we could go with MFI partnerships. They would sometimes be slow in processing loans. They would sometimes put ceilings on the number of loans they could issue per month because they're wanting to manage the risk in their portfolio. But that would stymie our growth. And so we began looking at some in-house financing options and have now moved mostly, probably 90%, to in-house financing options there. But that introduces problems with cash flow and access to capital, which we've found different ways to solve, but those are new problems that get introduced. We've done some research in some randomized control trial research on what happens when you offer a product with credit and without credit. And then we've also sort of have some anecdotal data, information from our sales data, which seems to show that access to credit can have a big impact. In the one RCT study we did, it was a 4-fold increase in the number of people who bought into the product. That was a latrine in that case. So it was 4 times more that bought the product when they had access to credit as compared to when they were just buying cash. So it can have a big positive impact, but it does introduce complications and a lot of extra management.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like weaning off the salespeople out of credit also could be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and this was one of the warnings that Scott gave us very early with Hydrologic, the water filter, saying, once people start selling on credit and they don't have to get that cash payment, it's hard to make them go back to a cash sale, and that is true. I think that's true in the Hydrologic case, in the water filter case, but we've been able to continue offering that credit, and so it hasn't become a barrier. In other programs, in the agriculture program, for example, we've done a number of trials with MFIs, and we get like 95% rejection rate from the MFIs for the customers that we bring to them. And so it's a different animal, and it doesn't fit as well for some reason with the MFIs, and so we haven't been able to quite crack that nut on the agricultural product side.
Thank you. So we're getting on to the hour. This is what happens with these kind of forums. There's not enough time to cover everything that needs to be covered. So I'm just gonna give each one of you maybe 30 seconds, any last words of wisdom, things that you wanted to get out to the audience that we didn't get the time or chance to go into. Scott, should we start with you?
Sure. Just be bold and be hardy when you build a sales organization. Learn as much as you can. Just because you don't come from a sales background, or if you don't come from a sales background, you can learn. And I was just speaking to a CEO yesterday that was flying to Uganda to go in the field for 8 days with his sales team. And I think that's one of the best things you can possibly do if you lead an organization. And when we built our insurance company here in the United States, from scratch, literally from zero, built $1 billion company. The CEO of the company, this is the 4 of us that started the company. I was the head of sales, and he had a commitment that every month he would be in the field at least 2 or 3 days, literally going door to door with the sales agents. This guy made a ton of money, as the CEO, but he still, to today, as the chairman of the board, 28 years later, goes door to door with the team in the field. So that would be my one piece of advice: is get out there and get your hands dirty, get your boots on the ground.
Thank you, Scott. Boston?
I would say I just wanted to tack on to something that Scott was talking about earlier, is that products in the developing world have to be aspirational to be sold. And I just wanted to throw my support behind his comment that that's not exactly true. And particularly when you look at health, there's this kind of generalization that we think that health doesn't sell. And so we say, okay, well, it's a water filter, but you can't say, okay, well, it's going to make you less sick. But then if you pull up the Unilever's Blue Band brand website, we were talking about this last week, the first thing they talk about is healthy children, healthy families, something like that. So if someone who's as good at sales and marketing as Unilever can sell something on health and decides to do that after how many millions of dollars of research, then clearly we shouldn't just make these sweeping generalities, and maybe we're just not doing it in the right way.
Thank you, Boston. Mike.
Yeah, as I guess a parting word of wisdom, when we started getting into this process of professionalizing our sales forces, I guess we had an idea that it could be a quick fix, and this maybe underlines what Scott was saying, but it requires more than just a few trainings. It really involves the introduction of a complete management system for recruiting, training, coaching, tracking data, following up on data. It becomes a significant component of your organization, and to the point where like for instance, our water filter company in Cambodia, we actually think that our greatest asset is the sales force that we've built up, more so than the particular product that we're selling, and because that's really what we've invested the most time in, and that's really what has driven its ongoing success and its profitability and going forward. So I think it's a worthwhile investment, but it is a significant investment in resources and time.
Thank you, Mike. And my last word of advice is actually to research more about these three organizations, IDE, Whitten Roy, and Burn, because in preparing for this webinar, I had the chance to learn quite a bit that we couldn't actually cover today. So I would encourage you all to reach out with more questions, but also to go on their website. There's quite a bit of wealth of information. I saw also that a lot of questions are around choosing a distribution strategy. That was not the point of today. DLab has developed a resource that talks about that. It's on our website. I'll send the link to that for those who are interested to dig in that subject, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the publication. So with that, Bashaya, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Saida. Hi, everyone. This is Bashaya. I'm a community manager at On Frontiers. And before you all log off, I just wanted to quickly give a few thanks. First of all, thank you, Saida, our moderator, and Mike Roberts, Scott Roy, and Boston Nyer for sharing your experiences and your learnings. It's been kind of a very interesting discussion, and once again, I know many of us wish that we had more time today. And also thank you to the USAID and the DIV team for sponsoring this event. And of course, last but not least, thank you to everyone here for attending and for contributing to the discussion. We're turning today's discussion into a podcast, and we'll be sharing that with you along with kind of a write-up of takeaways from the discussion today. And if you had any additional questions for our speakers or any comments on today's discussion, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me directly. My email is on the screen, balhanai@onfrontiers.com, or you can email hello@onfrontiers.com, and someone will take care of that. And if you want to learn more about On Frontiers and what we do, please check out our website, www.onfrontiers.com. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and have an awesome rest of the day.